our Sky News studios in Melbourne, live. The Bolt Report. Now, Andrew Bolt.
Malcolm Turnbull. He today stepped up his attack on the Liberals that he once led as Prime Minister, led until just 3 months ago. He is still furious at being dumped as a loser and for trying to force the Liberals to back his latest global warming scheme.
There is a significant percentage of the coalition members who do not believe that climate change is real.
Well, that's actually yet another Turnbull falsehood. Not a single Liberal MP I know denies that the climate changes. I don't either. We don't deny climate change is real. What we deny is the exaggerations, the falsehoods, the expensive fake fixes. We deny absurd scares as well, like this one pushed overnight by famed British TV presenter David Attenborough at the latest UN climate conference in Poland.
Right now, we're facing a man-made disaster of global scale. Our greatest threat in thousands of years, climate change. If we don't take action, the collapse of our civilizations and the extinction of much of the natural world is on the horizon.
Seriously, collapse of our civilizations? And is global warming seriously a bigger threat than was the plague, smallpox, the world wars? Does anyone seriously believe that? And does anyone really believe Attenborough's other wild claim in that speech? The public is now demanding tough global warming policies.
They want you, the decision makers, to act now. They're behind you, along with civil society represented here today, supporting you in making tough decisions, but also willing to make sacrifices in their daily lives.
Really? The public is begging to make sacrifices for the sake of global warming? That's not what the French public is saying right now. If Attenborough cared to check his TV news, French President Emmanuel Macron, he made a tough decision. He put a global warming tax on diesel petrol. And boy, the public did not welcome that at all. In fact, they have been rioting for weeks, furious at having to pay their own carbon tax. They've turned Paris into a battlefield. 3 people killed so far. You see, it's the poor who usually has to pay for the elite's global warming schemes, and some people clearly had enough. Here too, Malcolm Turnbull was today again flogging his own dud global warming scheme, his National Energy Guarantee, claiming that the public was screaming, that's the word he used, screaming for a deal. And he falsely claimed that taxpayers weren't being asked to actually subsidise anything.
I don't think you need to subsidise renewables anymore. I don't think you should. I don't think we should be subsidising any form of generation. So we should, and that was my policy, to have a technology agnostic approach.
You've got to watch what this bloke says. Turnbull himself actually announced massive subsidies for a snowy 2.0 scheme, which is kind of giant battery. And his government has subsidised a $10 billion loan scheme for green energy projects. And you pay for it all. For instance, you paid more than $60 million in grants for a green energy scheme flogged by former Climate Commissioner Tim Flannery, a geothermal plant in Inaminka that was such a dud it's had to be shut down. You also subsidised other dud green energy schemes, like a string of wave generators using the waves to produce electricity, including the one that failed off Port Kembla, the one that sank off Carrickalinga, and the one that was meant to power the Garden Island Naval Base. That got $13 million in subsidies, but unfortunately is so dodgy that the company's shares have collapsed from 29 cents to just 1. All this waste. And nobody here seems to care that it's all for nothing. Now, of course, you might say, hey, how can you, a mere journalist, be so sure that the so-called experts are wrong? How can I doubt the great David Attenborough? He speaks like an Old Testament prophet. Well, I doubt them for the reasons I've doubted so many crazy scares from just such experts. Take sea level rises. If the world really does heat like crazy, glaciers and snow, it's all going to melt and the sea levels are going to rise, and by a lot. And the alarmists have been really flogging this scare. Here is Al Gore in his Inconvenient Truth, now on our school's national curriculum.
The Arctic is experiencing faster melting. If this were to go, sea level worldwide would go up 20 feet.
Rising 20 feet, 6 metres, he says. Well, in 2006, do you know Tim Flannery, former climate commissioner, said it would be even higher. He said, picture an 8-storey building by a beach, then imagine waves lapping its roof. In 2007, the ABC's chief science presenter, Robin Williams, told me on air, not 6 metres, not 8 storeys, 100 metres of sea level rise this century. And in 2009, at the most famous UN climate change conference of all, the Copenhagen one, organisers released an official video that was actually meant to give children nightmares about droughts and about earthquakes, can you believe it? And especially flooding seas. Can you believe that global warming is even going to kill your little fluffy bear, your little nine-eye bear? Now, Turnbull says, oh, you're deniers. No, I don't deny the science. I check it. And I find that, in fact, in the past 100 years, the seas have risen 2, sometimes 3 millimetres a year. That rate would give us sea rises this century of 30 centimetres. Not 6 metres, not 8 storeys, not 100 metres, 30 centimetres. Most of it caused naturally and not by man. So no, Malcolm Turnbull, the Liberals are not filled with climate deniers. You and those Attenboroughs and those Flannerys, you are the deniers of the truth. Now, global warming campaigners keep claiming like it's their catechism, I believe in the science. I listen to the climate scientists. But that's bull, they don't listen at all. But you can. Judith Curry is one of the world's most famous climate scientists. I can't go through all her qualifications and positions, it'd take too long, but she was, for instance, chair of the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences at the Georgia Institute of Technology. She gives scientific advice to NASA. She's written countless papers and books on climate science, and she runs the influential blog Climate, etc. She has just completed a big review of the science on sea level rises, and I spoke to her a short while ago via Skype, so please excuse the quality of the vision. Judith Curry, thank you so much indeed for your time. A decade ago, Al Gore said the seas would soon rise by 6 metres. Tim Flannery said it could be 8 storeys high. And Australia's ABC's chief science presenter said anything up to 100 metres high by the end of the century. What does your review of the science actually conclude?
Well, since 1900, it has risen on average 20 centimeters. Okay? It's not very much. In the last 2 decades, sea level has been rising about 3 millimeters per year. Now, 3 millimeters is the height of 2 stacked pennies. So this is a very small amount. So the concern is not about what's happening so far. The concern is about these model projections, or in some cases, just wild speculation. The IPCC has been fairly conservative in its projections, maybe, up to maybe 60, 80 centimeters by 2100. But some of the recent research is really going for multi-meter sea level rise. And some of the most vocal people out there, scientists out there in the media are talking about sea level rise as much as maybe 20 meters. And these projections depend on completely not just implausible assumptions, but extremely unlikely to impossible assumptions. For example, these models are driven by the assumption that carbon dioxide will more than double in the atmosphere by the end of the 21st century relative to what it is now. And this requires various implausible to impossible assumptions, like we will return to coal and technological development will stop and population will grow at a completely unrealistic rate. And so there's all sorts of sort of impossible assumptions built into these projections. The climate models themselves are running too hot. They're running warmer. The last 2 decades, they're producing more warming than what we've seen in the observations. Also, the climate models only, they predict too much warming in response to carbon dioxide. Compared with the observations that we've seen in the 20th century, the climate models are just warming too much in response to carbon dioxide. So, so realistically, what can we expect? Even if the climate model warming is right, maybe 60 centimeters of sea level rise at the outside. And if the climate models are running too hot, well, then you would expect, significantly lower sea level rise. A sea level rise of 30 to 60 centimeters over the course of a century is something that we can manage. And in a lot of the locations where sea level rise is a problem, most of that problem isn't caused by warming, it's caused by the land sinking. Simply thinking that we can solve it by stopping warming somehow really, is futile. Even if you believe the climate models, reducing CO2 emissions at the level proposed by the Paris Agreement would have a minuscule effect on sea level rise by the end of the 21st century.
Judith, you said that the sea level rise so far, as opposed to all these predictions of global warming models that seem to be running too hot, not reliable, what we've actually seen is about 3 millimetres a year over the last century. How much of that is actually driven by... Well, even less.
Actually,
how much of that is driven by natural factors as opposed to man-made ones?
Okay, actually, it looks like that there's really no signal yet of human-caused warming. There's been this little bubble for the last maybe 25 years where sea level rise has accelerated. And that's really caused by melting from Greenland. But this melting from Greenland seems to be associated with the circulation pattern in the North Atlantic Ocean. We saw a similar bubble in the 1930s and 40s. with significant melting from Greenland. So this is natural variability. So we are not yet seeing a signal from, human-caused global warming on sea level rise.
We now hear David Attenborough tell the latest global warming conference in Poland that our civilizations could be destroyed if world leaders don't stop global warming. Now, unlike him, you are a climate scientist. Do you believe him?
Well, first, I don't think that even if we had the political will, we could do very much to change the climate. I mean, carbon dioxide is not a control knob for the climate. I mean, it has some effect on very long time scales, but it's nothing that you can really, dial up or down on the time scale of a century and change the climate. There's a lot of natural forces in play here that determine the climate. And thinking that we can really control the climate by dialing down the CO2 emissions is really misguided hubris.
And so why do you think there is this catastrophism?
I wish people could just step back and think about what makes sense for the environment, what makes sense for our energy system, and try to come up with something that makes sense for the 21st century. The path that we're on, apart from the issue of political will, it's not really going to do much for the environment or help the climate or anything else. I mean, it's just, we're spinning our wheels here and potentially investing a lot of resources into something that could make things worse, not better.
Well, who knows what it is, but Judith Curry, I really appreciate you taking the time to tell us what the science actually says. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
After the break, before that, I have to just report, that little global warming tax that the French put on their petrol, Save the Planet. After all the riots, the French government is thinking, according to BSCOB, of suspending that tax. So much for the public being willing to embrace the pain. After the break, what is the real cause of the terrible Queensland fires lately? And please don't say it's global warming, plus the great twerking scandal. And Alex Turnbull.